what are the fundamental principles of good architectural layout for contamination control in small molecule manufacturing, Herman?
Yeah, I mean, the first, and I'll use a general word, and then we'll work our way down for there. Is we have to prevent contamination from people, from external materials, from equipment moving around, whatever. So the first thing is unidirectional flow. That's the most important thing. There should be a singular path as they come in and go out. So operators should be able to go in, gown up, step through the different grades, do their process, and step out in a completely separate area. And quite frankly, you should have 180 degrees between entry and exit. The flows for people as well as material airlocks. Material airlocks should also be 180 degrees away from each other, and there should be an entrance in, a material airlock in, and material airlock out. Each way, that basically controls the flow. Now, the other issue that we've been doing, and we've been adding to it over the last 10, 15 years, is to make sure we have a clean corridor for entry, and we have a dirty corridor for exit. So when we leave, we don't contaminate our corridors as we go in and out. That's why I mentioned that 180 degrees. So you have a clean corridor, clean materials, clean people, just gown, going in and following a particular path. And on the way out, there is a path for waste, which does not cross over the people leaving and materials leaving. Waste has really got to be a very, very separate area and has to go to whatever kind of decontamination mechanism or collection and destruction it has to be. But those are the basic fundamentals. Grade changes, we should be an airlock between every grade change. We're not going to have just gang them all together and keep our fingers crossed. So there's a number of things that we really have to do in terms of how we proceed from the gowning up process all the way through to the exit process. And there's no backward motion in this. You move the materials through. Clean materials come in, they're used, and then they're moved out into the waste area. People move out. Pallets move out if you do moving pallets around. And today what we're looking at architecturally is to be able to put a containment area for pallets within the different zones so that we don't bring it out to a lower classification. So, I mean, if you want to really look at it from the standpoint is unidirectional flow, airlock between every grade change, clean corridor and dirty corridor as kind of a summary.
And well, pardon my ignorance on this, Herman. When you say 180 degrees in terms of a separation, is that suggesting a distance? What does that mean exactly?
That so they don't overlap. But a lot of times people want to cheat, so they put the personal airlock in, and then they put the personal airlock out next to each other. So you have this one corridor where the kind of stuff kind of mixes around, and people will mill around, and there's a temptation to open doors or whatever. So you have, so on one side of the building, you have the in, and the other side of the process area, you have the out.
Liz, I might ask you this next question, which is how do regulatory requirements inform layout, the kind of layout and design that Herman is talking about here, including those exact elements, airlocks between grade changes, unidirectional flow, separate clean and dirty return corridors. Is that cleanly laid out in regulatory documents? Is it something you have to document?
Yeah, so there are a lot of descriptions of the expectations for the buildings in which you're manufacturing laid out in the various regulations. With the updates to Annex 1, there are some pretty specific requirements, especially around airlocks and when you can have shared airlocks, when you shouldn't have shared airlocks, what are the requirements for the air quality of those airlocks, things like that. And I think that we're seeing really most importantly, a trend in regulators being really unwilling to accept poor facility design or aging facility design as an excuse for not complying with those things. Where, previously in years past, we could kind of risk assess or justify our way around having some of these not ideal designs. I think we're seeing a trend where the tolerance for that is really decreasing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point of the shared airlocks is really bad. I've seen in the past where people and materials share airlocks, You can't do that. And even today, the personal airlock coming in, personal airlock coming out, controlling that, managing that is not good. And it never really works out very, very well, because ultimately you'll have people degowning and gowning in the same area. And that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, so I imagine this has to be kind of thought about in the very earliest stages, because you've mentioned aging. Liz, you mentioned kind of aging facilities. At some point you can't really redesign a wholesale a facility, right? It's got to be kind of set up from the beginning. I mean, I'm just thinking you've both named a couple of common mistakes that people made with respect to architectural design. Are there any, I guess, final just sort of mistakes that you would mention that maybe that you've seen in practice, or that you would caution everyone who's listening to this webcast to avoid making?
Yeah, I'm going to say the biggest mistake I think people make when designing a facility is underestimating the square footage or the actual space you need for supplying clean air and removing dirty air in material airlocks and gowning rooms. Those are often like tunnel vision type of rooms that you think people are just passing through, but also balance that with, like, the bigger the space doesn't necessarily mean the more people you put in it, right? So we need to understand that, when you're designing a facility, having adequate space for people to come in, have a place for materials, have a place for cleaning agents so they can wipe down certain materials, and have the appropriate flow. That comes with you understanding not just flow, but having a sufficient physical space. Because if I had $1 every time I saw an EM excursion from a gowning room, I would be a trillionaire, because you go to every facility, all their trends, they're like, oh, they're in the gowning rooms. Well, that makes sense. People are there. Well, no, that's not just the reason. You should design your gowning spaces and your material transfer rooms to have adequate air exchanges, to have adequate airflow, and to be able to host the equipment that you need in the room to do the work in that room. And that's like one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, both in retrofitting clean rooms, right? And then you've got these storage rooms that are like huge and nothing's in them. And so it just, borrow, if you're trying to retrofit an aging facility, borrow or reconstruct space from another part of the facility. Or if you're doing a new design, when you think you have enough space, add more. That's my recommendation.